I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is recorded today, the Wiradjuri people, my people. I'd like to take this time to acknowledge our elders, past, those that watch over, guide and protect us, present, those that walk beside us, nurture and teach us the way, and future, the young ones that will succeed us into the future. I would like to acknowledge our continued connection to the lands, the waterways, and the skies, our animals, plants, and fauna. I would like to acknowledge our history. In story, song, and dance, we continue to share these stories. I would like to acknowledge each and every one of you. And I'd like to acknowledge the lands on which you tune into today, where you sit, where you live, where you work, and where you play, and how important it is for us to acknowledge where we are at this very moment. Mandangu, thank you.
Hi, I'm Jenny, host of It's Not About the Money, and today we are joined by an absolute dynamo in the financial education space. Lacey Filipich helps people become financially independent, reclaim their lives, and raise financially capable children. But how did somebody who graduated as valedictorian from the University of Queensland with an honours degree in chemical engineering become so passionate about teaching people about money? Today is the first in a series of episodes where I speak with Lacey about gender equality, about the systemic issues that prevent women from achieving the same levels of financial security in Australia as men, and her journey from chemical engineer to amazing financial educator. So join us as we talk about why it's not about the money. So hi Lacey, thanks so much for joining us today. Could you share with us what lands you live and work on?
I am sitting at the moment on Wadandi lands, which is in the southwest of Western Australia, and they are from the Noongar Nation. So I've been on the Noongar Nation for many years now. Previously was on the Whadjuk lands up in Perth, and now on Wadandi lands, and it's stunning over here. Absolutely beautiful. They've been amazing, our custodians, and I feel very privileged to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
So interestingly enough, for someone who talks about money a lot, I'm not a finance person by origin. I'm actually a chemical engineer. So I started my degree at the University of Queensland in engineering because I love problem solving, and then moved to Western Australia when I was 21 and joined the mining industry. And after many years there, I had I guess you'd call it a personal crisis, which a lot of people have. And I'm sure everyone's ones are different. My experience was I got really unwell and I spent 5 weeks bedridden, which was really scary. And it turned out to be a virus, but it was my first time that I'd ever realized that I was not immortal, you know. Mm-hmm. Remember that from your 20s?
Oh, yes.
Yes. And then I had a very sad event in the family where my sister ended her own life. And then I got a promotion. And I thought the promotion was going to be amazing, and it wasn't. So I had this series of events that made me question my existence and what I was doing as a career. And I decided to quit mining. And as I was doing that, I was having what we call mini retirements, where you take extended periods of time off. You might call them sabbaticals in other areas. I like mini retirement because I like this idea of bringing that time-rich feeling into our youth. And I was talking to my friends and they were going, how come you can take these big breaks, Lacey? Why do you get to take time off work? And I was saying, well, I've been saving and investing. What have you all been doing? And they were all like, well, we've got credit cards and car loans, all these kinds of things that mean if we stop working, we'll be broke in a month. And I went, oh my gosh, it was the first time I'd had this realization that no one had had the talks with them about money, and that I had just won the ovarian lottery, and that my mum taught me about money from when I was very young. And so I had learned these essential skills, and look, they're not complicated. They're pretty straightforward, but sometimes the discipline's hard. I'll just say that up front. But I'm lucky that I learned them young. Yes. Especially when you've just finished university and you've been living like a poor student, eating baked beans and noodles, and suddenly you've got a big wage by comparison. So yes, there's a tendency for people when they get their job to go spend crazy. I didn't. I kept investing. And so that meant I could choose to take time off, but I hadn't realized how few people had been taught about money. And this was back before finance got into the curriculum. So finance was introduced personal finance specifically, was introduced to the curriculum from years 1 to 10 in 2011. A lot of people don't know that. You'll hear that a lot, won't you? I mean, I know you know that, Jenny, but our listeners might not have heard that before. We all say things like, they should teach it at school, because those of us that are, in their late 20s or older probably didn't have much of it at school, but kids today do.
That's
so this
right,
was before
yes.
then. Yeah, this came in before then. I was sitting there going, well, how do we teach people? And so that's when I started Money School. So it's been 13 years now that I've been teaching people about money, the things that my mum taught me. And particularly I was interested in teaching parents how to teach their kids about money, like my mum did. But then it turned out there were so many adults that hadn't learned that I ended up teaching mostly grown-ups. So that's what I do with my time now. And that's how I've ended up as a financial educator.
That's awesome. Isn't that interesting that we can have an idea of how we expect our life to go, and especially in terms of our careers, and we expect this beautiful linear path, and it is not at all like that. It is ups and downs, and it throws us the curveballs and the things that we don't expect. And I'm guessing that you probably did not expect to be doing this when you were younger.
Not at all. This is not what I have seen in my future at all. I was determined when I came probably out of high school, and certainly through university, that I was going to be the CEO of an ASX listed company. I thought it would be a mining company.
There's still time. It just might not be a mining company, perhaps.
It could be, but it's interesting how my values have evolved. And I think what had happened when I was young is I went to an all-girls school as high school, and I was very lucky to go there on a scholarship. I wouldn't have had the opportunity without that. But I came out of high school just bulletproof. I thought I could do anything I wanted, except within physical realms of things like, needing 20/20 vision for being a pilot, that kind of thing. Understood that
genes.
was a limitation, yeah. But I was determined to do whatever I wanted to do, and I wanted to do well. And I had seen so many incredible role models at school and among my friends' parents, and even watching my parents who hadn't had the same benefits that I'd had, and watching my mum, get her accounting qualification and become an accountant and then start to progress through her career. I was just determined to do well in business and to make a big impact. But I had a very capitalist view of that back then. I thought it was getting to be CEO and making lots of money. And I guess over time, I've really shifted my priorities. And I really now think about being time rich as being much more important as being what we would call traditionally successful in a corporate career. So all my decision making now is around what will make me feel time rich, what's the best use of my time. And money is actually secondary to that. It's just an enabler for that. So I don't know if you'll ever find me being the CEO of an ASX listed company anymore, because that does not look like a time rich experience to me.
It is interesting. It's interesting how values can change over time, how our lived experience and those sometimes detours in life can make us really reconsider and rethink things, and
yes,
change
does.
our priorities, definitely. I think also what you touch on about values there, I hear this a lot in the financial education space and talking to people generally, where there is that real value judgment about what people spend their money on. And I hear it particularly in the context of people who may be on lower incomes. Now, I grew up in a very low income house, so my experience has very much shaped my perspectives of the world. And it often makes me quite sad that there is this value overlay that's placed on decisions that people make about their money, wherever that is, with no understanding of the context in which those decisions are made. That actually sometimes we need to take a step back and not overlay our values with the choices of others. People are doing really, really well in the situations often that they're in, and that is across the socioeconomic range, actually. We need to not make assumptions about people's choices and the rationale for choices, but also not assume because of people's circumstances that their choices have put them into those situations either. The idea that we can budget our way out of poverty dismisses the reality that the best budgeters are those on the lowest incomes, because you have to make every single dollar count, and you have to know where every single dollar goes, because there is no slush.
Exactly. And it's very hard, I think, for people they might relate to this. I certainly grew up in a household that had Liberal voters, as in capital L for the party, Liberal. The hard thing for people, it can be, if you grew up in a household where the message was poor people make bad decisions, you went outside and you saw reinforcement of that on the surface level. You saw people who would get money and then buy alcohol with it or buy drugs with it, right? Homeless people, people in dire straits, that kind of thing. So you had it visually confirmed for you that, yeah, poor people don't give them money because they're just going to waste it. Of course, now we know that is not the case. We know that what happens to people when they are financially stressed is that they lose IQ points. They make worse decisions than they would in any other circumstance. And it's 13 IQ points. Thank you, Princeton University's Poverty Brain Study in 2013 for finding a number, because 13 IQ points is substantial. The average human's around 100, so you're talking about a 13% handicap. And what's happening in those people's brains is there's a script running going, can I afford to eat? Can I afford the rent this week? You know, like, what am I going to do? And while that script is running, it's taking up some of their brains, like CPU space, like some of the cognitive capacity, so that the space they've got to make other decisions is worse. So anyone who feels poor makes worse decisions. The problem is the poorness. That's not a character thing. It's a situation. And the cure they found was if you give them money, it gets rid of that IQ drop fully. If you solve that financial stress. So I think there's this like, you know, spectrum, isn't there? There's people who are, you know, who are really severely stressed, at risk of homelessness or already homeless, really on the poverty line. And we know that that's 1 in 8 adults and 1 in 6 kids in Australia. That's a significant number of people. They are like really stressed. Then you've got the people who are, like you're saying, they don't have spare money. They're on a tight budget, so they haven't got room for maybe even, they can't even save at the moment, and that's okay too. But they do have to make every dollar stretch. And then you've got the rest of us who are, you know, doing okay. We've got some money spare and we can save. And then the people who are really wealthy. And on that spectrum, what we see is the people who are doing okay and really wealthy often look at the people at the other end and go, well, that's your fault. You made bad choices. And of course, that is not the case, not by a long stretch. And the solution is actually, if we lift everybody out of that financial stress, they're all going to make better choices and everybody's going to be much happier. And if you're a capitalist, you'd want that because it costs you less money, because you don't have to pay for all the services and the hospital stuff and the ongoing health effects of that impact of poverty. So I know we've kind of meandered there.
It is all relevant. That's the problem. It's that overlay of complexity of problems. But
exactly.
We saw that in practice during COVID when we had supplements being paid to people, which lifted them across the poverty line, and all of a sudden mental health improved, physical health improved. We know the solution to poverty. It's just unpalatable, the idea that we actually pay people a living wage. And that is... that makes me really sad. Actually.
It is. It's. I see it as a traditional capitalist problem. It's just this mindset that's built the society we're in now. There are people out there who cannot grasp it, and they're in politics. You know, like I take a quote of one of the Liberal senators. I think it was senator, or was it an MP? Sorry, I don't know. With her quote of, we don't want to give more money to people because they just give more money to pubs and to drug dealers. You know, so you've got this, you know, group of people coming through that have grown up with that belief. Now, I don't blame them for that, but I hope that they will realise that they're wrong. They're literally wrong. The science has proven that. And how do we move forward? What I find very interesting at the moment is how swiftly AI has come in, is possibly going to trigger the speed with which we need to consider this. How do we give people the basics they need to survive? So a roof over their head and some food is pretty much, you know, like that's the sort of fundamental thing. And of those two, the roof over the head is the most important, that somewhere to live. They can work the other stuff out, usually, if they feel safe and housed. And I think that housing insecurity is the biggest thing that probably most people in Australia would be feeling something about at the moment, certainly with the way that the economy is playing out. But you're exactly right. The funny thing was, during that point with JobKeeper and JobSeeker, those increased payments, I remember the financial counsellors came out and they were like, calls to our centres have dropped off. This is terrible. Like, remember, we're here. And I remember thinking, yeah, but that's because people aren't as stressed. This is an outcome of feeling safe, an outcome of feeling like your basic needs are going to be met. And as AI sweeps through and we discover that we don't all need to work 40 hours a week, and hey, actually, it's probably not the best use of our time. It's probably quite wasteful because of all of the stuff that we do when we're working and how much energy we consume commuting and running these big office buildings. Maybe we only have to work for, and I think, the number that gets thrown around a lot is a 15-hour work week on average. That's certainly the one that was put forward in Utopia for Realists by Rutger Bregman. That's where they talk in depth about that financial stress impact, about the 15-hour work week, this idea that we actually all probably only need to work part-time in the future. So how do we make sure people have got enough money if they're only going to be working part-time? And his proposed solution is some kind of social agreement, some kind of support or payment, universal basic income, that kind of thing. So I wonder, because we're now seeing this exponential increase in AI usage, whether we're going to hit that point where it becomes not just this hypothetical idea, but we go, actually, we have to have this. Otherwise, you're going to see that wealth gap widen, and we'll have more people homeless and stressed, and they can't be productive members of society. They can't be good family members when they feel like that. So how do we fix that? I wonder if this tech advancement is going to speed it up.
It's a really interesting concept to consider, along with everything else about AI as well. We are definitely facing that Brave New World kind of point where we don't have the answers, and we really need to be talking about them and discussing it and thinking about the what if. And I think particularly in the context of the widening wealth gap, the widening income gap, the gap between the haves and the have-nots, it has grown in the past 4 years. And there is no reason why it's going to narrow. There is absolutely no imperative, apart from we have to close it, because otherwise we're going to end up in a society where there is such a mental health toll, where there's such a physical health toll, where people are not going to be able to live happy and fulfilled lives. And as humans, that's such an important part of who we are. It is a human right to have meaning and to have food security and to have accommodation security. And our society and our economy at the moment is not solving those problems in a very equitable and fair manner.
Totally agree. And the irony of this is, and I've had this argument with lots of people, is if you were a proper capitalist, as in you want the most efficient use of resources for the greatest good, and you want to lower your taxes, which is what most of them are worried about, then you want people to feel secure.
Yes.
Because that mental health tax burden and all the other health effects and housing effects lands on your tax bill eventually.
Yes.
So why would you not want it? Like it is so counterintuitive. And that's where I think that there's this idea of if I give more to them than I lose is so short-sighted. I don't understand that cycle. So I think that's the biggest challenge for achieving that outcome, is getting the people at the upper end of that spectrum who are doing well and have lots of money to understand that it will be more financially beneficial for you overall if these people don't feel financially insecure, first of all. Second of all, there's research that says you're all going to be happier. The wider the wealth gap, the unhappier everybody is in society.
Yes.
Like everybody from top to bottom. So if you can close that gap a bit, everyone is happier. We all get to feel warm and fuzzy.
Yes.
Why would you not want that? Anyway.
I don't know. I genuinely don't know, because having studied economics, I think one of the issues around capitalism is it works the way it's intended. And we have this misconception when we talk about capitalism, that capitalism is designed to achieve equality and achieve equity. That's not the point of capitalism. Capitalism is about rewarding the entrepreneurship, and it is not about fairness at every level. Is there a better system? Well, that's arguable. But the idea that absolutely we know from international studies that as you said, where that wealth gap is narrower, where there is a far more equitable and equal spread of wealth, that there are far better outcomes economically. They're better economies, they're better societies, they've got better health outcomes for everybody, better mental health outcomes for everybody. And we know that from research. And I find it fascinating why we are so fearful to try something different when the neoliberalist approach, liberal with a little L there, that the neoliberalist approach has actually exacerbated inequality, and exacerbated inequality for women, and exacerbated inequality for diverse women. One thing you mentioned was cultural differences towards money. And I think it's a really important point, because a lot of the traditional financial literacy programs, financial capability programs even, come from a particular worldview of money. And let's be honest, a lot of those programs have traditionally been built by white, affluent men with a particular lived experience, who often come from the perspective of, we just need to teach people to budget better and they'll make better money decisions, which completely dismisses the reality that there is such a range of cultural beliefs around money and cultural differences that really need to be acknowledged if we're going to support people to make good financial decisions for their situation.
Absolutely agree. It's a massive limiting factor with money. There's a reason the bookshelf behind me is filled with female authors, and that is because there are literally hundreds of female finance authors that do not get anywhere near enough airplay. They don't get syndicated in magazine columns. That kinds of thing. They don't go into newspapers because there's this perception of the white male, particularly older male, being the sage with this stuff.
Yes.
And you're right, that does perpetuate into what we teach people. And this personal responsibility myth that gets applied universally, it's just a slap in the face to people who are, and it's a significant proportion of our population, who are not able to budget their way out of poverty and should not be expected to. Yep. So I do think that acknowledging those cultural differences and the different family dynamics is why you have to do some of this at home. It's impossible for us to teach it like in a generic way for everybody. You know, I think about Muslim families and their practice of zakat. I'm probably saying that wrong, but this idea of instead of tithing 10% of your income, which is popular in Catholic communities, they do 2.5% of their net wealth, like that. You know, so if you own more than 2 ounces of gold worth of stuff, so about $5,000 Australian, then you're expected to give away 2.5% of your wealth, not your income, every year, and it goes to a centralized place that is to help support orphans and widows. So this collect, and then they don't believe in interest, that sort of stuff. So there's some huge cultural opportunities, that are very different from how Anglo-Saxon society would view them as being okay or normal. And a lot of them are built on trust and collectivism. This is for me also a huge thing when I talk to groups of Indigenous Australians. They really do, it's a great example of capitalism and this walking in two worlds. They have a sharing expectation. It's part of their culture, yet we expect them to exist in a society that values individualism. And so and that has massive financial implications for when they get a job and how they're expected to share their income. So there's a lot of that stuff that I think is a really strong argument for having as wide a variety of voices as we can, so that there is a whole plethora out there. There doesn't need to just be this, one or two old white dudes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's have dozens of voices so that people can find the ones that work for them. I think we've got to be very conscious of it and very proactive about involving those voices. And that's why whenever I get the opportunity, I will, share those books and share those roles and tag those people, because the more of those voices that other people see, the more chance that they'll find something they relate to, that will be much more applicable for them. And then they might actually put it into effect instead of hearing it and going, well, that's not for me, which is what I suspect happens a lot at the moment.
Yep. And it is funny looking at your bookshelf going, I recognise quite a few of the titles. I don't have all of mine on the shelves behind me, but I can tell you there is only one book on that shelf that's written by a man, and it's because it is a behavioural finance book, and he is the only person that has written an Australian book in the context on behavioural finance. But
look, we need them too, right? We need, that's what I mean, all the voices, but I prioritise the women because they don't get enough airplay. And every time there's an opportunity to show my bookcase, I'm like, well, that's a subliminal message that people are getting about all these awesome female authors, and they'll go and hopefully pick those up. So yes, it is. I think we've still got to have the men in there, but that who we choose to give airplay to, that's a decision that's made.
When I started learning about personal finance in the 1990s, we had Paul Clitheroe, who was brilliant. We had Noel Whittaker, who was brilliant. We had David Koch, who was brilliant. But you know what? I have been so excited in particularly the last 5 years to see so many Australian women publishing books in the space, stepping into roles as financial educators, taking on positions of advocacy in the financial space, because that is how we get change. And according to the UN, it's going to take us around 100 years to achieve gender equality. Do we want to wait that long? If not, what can we do now? What policies and strategies can we implement now to create real practical change for Australian women?
Look, this is such a big question and I love it. There's a lot of options. So first of all, no, we don't want to wait. Well, I don't want to wait. I don't think we should wait. And no matter, what you say about, it takes time to change, I think you have to look at policy. I've talked a little bit about the cultural side of things where, changing this acceptance of men being at home is important. If I was going to change anything, though, if I thought we were going to try and right the wrongs and make society more equal and equitable in general, including for women, I would look at universal basic income. And the reason for that is I think it's your simplest, swiftest lever to alleviate the things that drive families and individuals to deprioritize women's financial security. If you have enough money to ensure that you've got a roof over your head, then you can make better choices all around. You can make more informed, more fair, more equitable choices. And I think it would benefit all groups that are marginalised. Now, the reason why gender is so hard is because we're actually a majority. Unlike the other groups I'm thinking about that might be, like different races or different sexual orientations and stuff that tend to be a smaller proportion. We're a majority. That's why I think it's very hard to talk about us as when, if we are, we're suffering for this, but we are a majority. If you could just apply across the board rule like that, I think you would solve a lot of these problems. And I think it would probably have very good financial outcomes in the long run for Australia in terms of our caring load, in terms of our, and how much Centrelink we require. The long-term effects of that would be monumental. So I would run a trial, and I would run that trial for UBI in Western Australia, where we have a $5.8 billion surplus. We are the state that should be able to afford to do a trial, and we still haven't done one in Australia. There is not an Australian UBI trial apart from JobKeeper and JobSeeker, and that was a very positive result. So it's an early indication that it's worth pursuing. So that is if I could wave my magic wand, I'd do that. The other thing I would do is change company law. I would change the non-executive director duties to not just the survival of the organisation, but it can't be at the expense. I think that's the wording that you get from Grameen. I've forgotten the name, Professor Yunus, I think it was, who came up with it. This idea of the corporation or the organisation's survival is paramount and that shareholder primacy is inherent. I would change it to you can't do harm. On top of that. And I think that would force companies to then recognise the inherent damage they're doing with gender pay gaps and with environmental damage, with all those things, and you would have that. So if I was going to play with two policies, those are the two I would be looking at. Wouldn't it be lovely if I had a magic wand and a sliding doors moment and we could do a hypothetical? But unfortunately, that's going to be for people with a lot more, knowledge and power than me. But yeah, they're the two I'd choose.
Now, you do a fabulous TEDx talk, which I will link to make sure that everybody listening and watching can have a look at. It is fabulous. And you talk about financial independence and mini retirements. And it's such a beautiful message. It's such a fabulous concept. But we know that many women struggle with just the day-to-day living costs, and especially now, and just getting by. How can we shift the goalposts? And I'm not talking necessarily about individuals, because we exist in a much bigger system. But how do we shift the goalposts from trying to get by and to make ends meet to actually feeling like financial security is achievable?
Really important question. I think about my mum whenever I think of this question. because she had a period where she's a single mum, very low income, supporting 2 girls. Money was tight. You know, we were lucky if we got 1 week in a caravan park at the Gold Coast as a holiday. You know, like that was like a good year. So I remember those days. And so I think I'll just say what her advice would be because she lived it. She would say, first of all, if you're in that situation, know that it's temporary, it will pass, and do not beat yourself up if you cannot save, right? Because that's the thing everyone you hear says, oh, you have to save, you have to save. There are periods in your life where you cannot save if you're in a situation like that. So putting the expectation on yourself is not fair. Okay, so that's the sort of individual, except that even if it was, like in her case, 10 years before she could really save and start investing, it will happen eventually. You're going through a period where you can't. So I think for anyone who's really struggling, please take Fran's message to heart. It's temporary. Don't beat yourself up. Be kind and gentle to yourself in that situation and accept the amazingness of even if you can just make ends meet, or even if you, like, I only need a little bit of debt to get through. Okay, so it's not a fair expectation that you should be saving 20%. Let's just throw that out until you're earning more, right?
Yeah.
And for those people, of course, that's my thing, is we need to get you earning as much as you can, as soon as you can, and keep ramping that up. That's where your best energy is going to be spent, not on cutting, on how can we ramp up your income. On a systems-wide thing, I think we have to look at, again, that universal basic income or better support. We just can't afford to have, and I think this is an existential threat for us. We need every bright mind we can working on the problems that we face. And when those people are worried about feeding themselves and putting a roof over their head, they can't focus on those problems, can't solve those problems. So it's in our interests to have them feeling financially secure and getting ahead. So that's where I come back to that UBI, that universal basic income idea, as being, if I was going to go for a policy thing, that's what I'd do. Just because I think it's going to be the swiftest, simplest, and probably most effective way to achieve it quickly. Which we need.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we can't be here in 10 years' time going, oh, women still can't fully participate, because, hey, we need their brains and we need their problem solving. We need everybody. We need the whole lot of us in there. So that's where I come back to the systems stuff.
And I think it's not just the women living in poverty, it's that intergenerational effect. We need the brightest brains, and we know that there are too many kids living in poverty purely because there's not enough money, not because their parent or parents aren't doing enough.
No, exactly.
And it's a tragedy in a society as wealthy as our nation that there are still kids in poverty.
No, total travesty.
Now, we have talked a lot about systemic change, and we know that individuals can do as much as they can do within that context of needing to implement systemic change. But what are 3 things that women can do now to make a difference in their financial position, whether that's as an individual or creating change in the system?
I think if you're already financially secure, your advocacy is needed. And I would encourage you to find male allies that you can help skill up to help bring about that change. I think that's one of our biggest levers. So if you're financially secure, that's what I'd say. If you are not feeling financially secure, the biggest lever you will ever have is your income, the ability to earn more money. If that's out of the question, different story. But if you can earn an income, focusing on how you can make the most and increase your income is going to be the thing that's going to pay the biggest dividends and get you out of poverty as quickly as you can. So for those that are able to do that, then focusing on that is really important. For people who can't do that, I want you to stop blaming yourselves. Stop taking it personally. Stop thinking you're a failure. Stop internalizing these messages that you've been told. If you are one of those people who, like 1 in 8 adults in poverty, 1 in 6 children in poverty, like that, and that's the pointy end of the spear. There's all the other stuff. Please stop blaming yourself. It's not helping you. It's not going to move you forward. You need to be kind to yourself. Accept that it's a season that can pass, and then find the best path to get out of there that you can while we try and achieve this systemic change. But that's why that first piece of advice to people who are financially secure, the best use of your time is probably going to be advocating for systemic change, and doing that via male allies is probably going to get us there quicker. Does that answer your question?
That is awesome. I love it.
Okay.
I love that it recognises that we're all at different positions in our journey and all in different positions of capability. And for some of us, it is surviving. And for those of us who have a bit more space, then we really need to be responsible and help the message get out. I think it's really important. So last one, go-to resources. So
right.
books, podcasts, websites, what are your go-tos that you think everybody should know about?
All right. So for anyone in financial stress, you must know about National Debt Helpline and financial counsellors. Okay, so that's the first one. The financial counsellors don't get talked about enough. They are the heroes of the finance system in Australia. If you are in financial stress, they are someone who cannot sell you anything. They are in your corner and they will help you. So that is it for those people. For everybody else, I just encourage you to read and watch as widely as you can and find as many voices as you can that you connect with. So if you looked at Noel Whittaker and Paul Clitheroe and they didn't hit the money for you, they didn't, pun, but anyway, if they didn't do it for you, keep searching. And I've got a long list of books behind me. I'll probably get you to put some of those up as links on your podcast, but there is a plethora of female voices out there. So if you're a woman and you haven't found a voice that you connect to yet, you just haven't found them, start with the books. Go to your local library. My library's got like a massive shelf of financial education books, and about half of them are women authors, and there's a real variety out there. Read as widely as you can. Now, I used to send people to Money Smart. I don't send them there very often anymore because it doesn't refer out. I really like Extra Foundations Talk Money program. If you're a teacher, go and check that out. But just keep looking and learning. You'll find a voice that you connect with if you haven't already.
Yeah, absolutely. That is great advice, and it's never been a better time to find out about the money stuff than right now, because there are so many fabulous resources out there. And yes, we would definitely have links to some of those. Well, thank you so much, Lacey. It has been an absolute delight talking to you. It has been so much fun.
I have
Even
loved
though we
it.
have been talking about some very, very difficult topics and some challenging things, there are so many things to think about, and really appreciate you taking the time to have such an in-depth conversation with us.
I have loved it, Jenny. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And here's to more change makers in this space. Come and join the fun in financial education. It's a great area to work in.